So I'm going to talk about secrets to surviving and dealing with stress. Stress. Okay, who has stress right now? I think we all do, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, work, finances, economy, everything. Now, there's a couple of things we can do to really handle stress, and I'm going to hit these topics pretty quickly, but they kind of go through this. One is it's all in your mind. There's an incredible amount of research and data saying that our perception and what we decide is stress is actually the stress we feel. Also, thinking positive is really important. Sleep is an incredible way to decrease stress. Laughing, there's actually data where laughing decreases stress, increases your mood, but also has a biochemical, physiologic effect on yourself. Getting outside, just being in nature, actually makes you much less stressed out. Exercise is really, really important as well. Finally, people don't believe this, but work is actually typically really good. It causes stress, but it relieves stress as well. This is a great proverb. Whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. If you have a positive attitude, at least you have a shot. If you think you can't do it, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's not going to work out for you. Now, does anyone know what these numbers mean with this date? So 359.4, May 6, 1954, it's a famous day in sports. So this is the day that Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute barrier in the mile. That record had stood, I think, for something like 26, 28 years, right above 4 minutes until he broke it. Now, the incredible thing is doctors back then, they thought that if someone ran a sub 4-minute mile, their heart would explode and they'd probably just die because they thought it was impossible. So anyway, Bannister did it and actually got knighted and is now Sir Roger Bannister. The incredible thing is, do you know what happened 46 days later? Landry, his chief rival, broke the 4-minute barrier as well. Then they raced each other in August. They both broke the 4-minute barrier, and then Bannister set a new world record. So the world record was beaten 3 times in less than 6 months. Since that time, about 1,400 people have ran the sub 4 mile, including a bunch of high schoolers. This is now considered the standard for fast intermediate distance runners, where before it was thought it was totally impossible. Once someone broke the barrier, someone showed the world that it was possible, then everyone else kind of followed along. The power of the mind. I don't know how many people are Navy SEALs, but this is a Navy SEAL mantra. It's called the 40% rule. And what they say basically is this. Once you think that you are totally physically tapped out and done, that means you only went to 40%. You have 60% more to give, all right? You think you're totally done, but you're not. And the idea behind that is your body has enough reserve, but your brain is saving energy just in case it needs more. So when you really think you're done, tapped out, you have over half more to give, all right? And people call that the governor model or the regulator model, all right? So we all know this, the mind gives up much sooner than the body can. Okay, this is a great study. I don't know how many people are Star Wars fans. I'm a big Star Wars and Star Trek fan, but this is an incredible study. It's called the Oxy-RBX trial. And what's interesting is they actually had people inject themselves, these are all runners, inject themselves with something that they were told was a weak EPO analog. EPO is a drug that people use to get more red blood cells. And before they start blood doping, bikers and endurance athletes would give themselves EPO shots to increase their red blood cell count, oxygen carrying capacity, basically cheat that way. What's interesting is this is a total placebo. What the runners were injecting was just water. But this is the incredible results here. If you look at this graph, what you can tell is the control group cut their time down just by a little bit, which is the white bar right here. The people that were injecting themselves with the water, they had a significant drop in their running time. They got faster in 2 weeks. Now, most people know that if you train for 2 weeks, you can have almost no impact on your running. The other thing they found is the people that were injecting themselves with the saline, they also felt like running was easier. This is a massive placebo effect. Basically, they were faster and they thought it was easier, but they were not doing anything different. So pretty powerful study. Now, another way to look at this, I don't know how many people are PC or Macintosh computer people. I'm a Mac guy. But if you read Marcus Aurelius, there's two groups of people that are really into the don't worry kind of philosophy. One is the Stoics, and Marcus Aurelius is probably one of the biggest examples of that. And here's some quotes. Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you have not been. If you don't feel like you're offended, don't want to be offended, you're not going to be offended. Our lives are what our thoughts make it. Our attitude and perceptions are incredibly powerful. Third, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. This is some pretty powerful quotations to really think about. Mm-hmm. The other group that says not worry are the Christians. And this is probably the most famous verse. I'm going to read the last part of it in Matthew 6. They say, and who by being anxious can add a single hour to his lifespan? Therefore, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. By worrying, you cannot really impact the future. Worrying definitely can't change the past, and it actually spoils the present. And there's a great quote here. I'm an old man, I've known a great many troubles, but most of them have never happened. A lot of times we use a lot of energy worrying, and then things turn out well, and then we realize, what did we worry for? What was the point of all that worry? Does anyone know who said this? Yeah, Mark Twain.
Yeah.
So it makes total sense.
Yes.
Now, the next couple of studies are really, really important. When we measure stress in medicine and in science, how do you think we measure stress? A lot of people say we measure cortisol levels, blood pressure, heart rate response. What we do is we ask the patient, do you have a little bit, mild amount, moderate, or a lot of stress? It's a very subjective question. And so this is why this is important. The perception of stress is probably the most important thing. Now, this is a great study. What they did is they asked people what was their stress level and if they felt that their stress was impacting their health, yes or no. And what they found is in the whole group, I can skip this slide. In the whole group, you can see here almost no stress, little stress, moderate stress, or a whole lot of stress. What they found is the only group that had worse outcomes, more clinical events, was the group that had a lot of stress, and they also thought that that stress did affect their health. If you didn't think it affected your health, it did not affect your health. The perception was the most important thing about it. You can say the stress level was the same, but if they said it affected them, they allowed it to affect them. Perception is really, really important. Now, this is a really interesting study. People go, that sounds great, but how does that happen? This study shows the stress level and the biological connection of how this can actually happen. So this is the hypothesis. What they felt is the amygdala, which is the kind of emotional midbrain. When you have stress, that turns on the midbrain. The midbrain then sends signals to your bone marrow. It activates the bone marrow to release cytokines, cytotoxic agents, and inflammatory agents. They'll then go to the blood vessels and cause irritation, which will lead to plaque and narrowing of the arteries. And what they found is that's actually true. So they did something, they actually had a PET scan of your brain, which is a positron emission tomography, where it sees where the activation is in your head. And when you had low amygdala activation, you actually did really, really well. When it was really activated, you had way more clinical events, heart attack, stroke, death. Let me go here. Now, this is an example. On the left, we have a person who's unstressed. The amygdala areas are not turned on, they're not green on the PET scan. The aorta is not inflamed or irritated, and the bone marrow is deactivated. Now, in the person that just feels or perceives he has a lot of stress, these little horns, the amygdala, the midbrain, the emotional part is activated, the aorta is irritated and inflamed, and the bone marrow is highly turned on. So this actually supports the total hypothesis. The sensation, the feeling, the perception will drive the physiology. Now, when we looked at this, as you had more and more activation of the amygdala, if you had more and more stress on your stress scoring, you actually had more activation of your emotional midbrain. Same thing here. And finally, there's something called CRP. This is a blood test that measures how inflamed your arteries are. As you can see, the more the people said they're stressed, the higher your CRP level. So there's physiologic and biochemical measures that correlate with how you perceive stress. All right, has anyone read this book, Man's Search for Meaning? Okay, highly recommend it. It's a great book. Okay, and here's some quotes from Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies the growth and our freedom. We decide how we react to stimuli. And for those that don't remember or don't know, Viktor Frankl was a Jewish psychiatrist who was actually in a German concentration camp and survived the war.
Wow.
Everything can be taken from a man or anything. The last of the human freedoms to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. No one can take that away from us. We decide how we're going to react to things. All right. Now, stress not only is a biochemical factor, it's actually a physical factor. There's something called telomeres, which are the caps of your chromosomes. And what happens is as your cell gets older, the telomeres get shorter because they're being used up. And what we found is even in the people the same age, what will happen is people that are stressed out will have shorter telomeres versus people that are less stressed out. So your cell is actually aging due to stress. All right, it makes a physical change in your chromosomes. Now, mood and emotion is very important too, and we totally control our own emotions. This is a very interesting study. What they looked at is strokes, heart attacks, heart failure, all-cause mortality, and any clinical event. And what they found is as people were more and more hostile, their event rate went up. And you can kind of see this graphic representation, especially look here. So people that were the most hostile had a 10% chance of having a bad event happen to them per year. That's significant. That's 1 in 10.
Wow.
Now, as far as emotion goes, I'm sure you've seen people at work where they're getting really mad, their temples are throbbing, they're all red, and you think in your mind, that guy's gonna have a stroke. Now, it's actually true, and here's the data. What they find is when you have an angry outburst at a coworker, spouse, or your kid, your risk of a myocardial infarction or a heart attack, a ischemic stroke, blowing an aneurysm in your brain, or having a ventricular arrhythmia or abnormal heart rhythm is elevated, sometimes 8 times more than baseline. Now, how long do you think this risk period lasts? Yeah, it's about 2 hours. And there's a bunch of data now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but they've studied death rates and heart attack rates in California before and after earthquakes. And there's a huge spike in the couple of hours after an earthquake of people having strokes, heart attacks, and death. And I think that's just from the stress of the earthquake. This is a fascinating study. On the left, the CDC, this is the CDC heart rate death map. On the right, they took and they mined Twitter for all the negative words on the Twitter feed in the same area, and then they overlay them. And what they found is, and you can look at the red, the more negative words, the more likely people are going to die in that county. Right? So basically, you know, the people that are on social media that are just trolls, always arguing, being mean, these are probably people in that community that are generating excess deaths. Now, it'd be great if those were the people that actually died. We don't know that, but we can only hope. Now, on the total flip side of anger is laughter. And this is an incredibly well done, interesting study here. So I'm not defending the choice of movies, but they had a group of cardiology fellows, trainees, watch Something About Mary or Kingpin, or they watch Saving Private Ryan. And there's something called the brachial artery reactivity test. What they'll do is they'll measure with ultrasound how big your brachial artery is in your arm, and they'll measure it after they give it stress. A normal artery should expand, get bigger. A diseased or stressed artery will actually contract, and that will have decreased blood flow, could cause problems, especially if it's in your heart. Here's the data. What they found is people that were laughing, as a general rule, their arteries all got bigger. They dilated. People just watching Saving Private Ryan, which is a stressful movie, their arteries constricted. They're not actually in war, they're just watching a war movie. And even that amount of stress can have a physiologic effect on your body. The other important thing is this. There's always this one guy that you cannot make happy. He's watching a funny movie and his arteries constrict. We can't do anything for that guy. Okay. Now, we said that angry outbursts put you at risk for about 2 hours. How long do you think the protective vascular effect is of laughing? It's about 24 to 48 hours.
Wow.
So if you laugh, you're protecting yourself from possible cardiac arrhythmias, heart attack, or even stroke. Laughing is a really great therapy. Now, there's a great little video of perspective. Girls crying, got 98. This guy got 19. All right, so this is all based on perspective. Some people are not happy unless they get 100. Some people are miserable sad when they get 98. And this is all kind of perspective here. Thinking positively, it's so important. Your brain is so powerful. So there's a bunch of studies in this meta-analysis they looked at. And first thing, just looking at pessimism. If you are pessimistic in outlook, if you look over here, your event rate is 30 to 40% higher than people who are not pessimistic. Now, when you look at optimism on the bottom here, this is all these ratios are less than 1. So the impact in the smallest study was 10%. In this study, there was basically a 76% reduction. I'm sorry, no, it's about a 73% reduction in event rates if you're an optimist. So there's a wide range, but the bottom line is being an optimist has a positive impact on heart attack, stroke, and death. All right, so attitude, positive thinking, very, very important. Now, one thing that's a very practical thing to do to help people move from bad attitude, pessimism, even depression is what we call gratitude journaling. I don't know if anyone in the audience has ever done this, but what they recommend is to just every morning write down 2 or 3 things you're happy for, or verbally say 2 or 3 things you're happy for. And what they found is basically your sleep's better, your mood's better, and inflammatory biomarkers such as CRP and cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone, all those things are improved by just journaling a little bit. The funny thing is they recommend 2 or 3. They say when they ask people to do 5 or 7 positive things, people got more depressed because oftentimes they couldn't find 5 or 7 things they're happy about. So they just go 2 or 3 is probably just enough. And there's a great saying I like. Struggle ends when gratitude begins. When you start appreciating the things that you have, it really changes your overall outlook and makes your life a lot easier. Now, here's a great example from the movies. This is Denzel Washington, and he was in an actor's studio meeting, and then another actor said, making movies are really difficult. And then he went on this rant. People say, oh, the difficulty of making a movie, send your son to Iraq. That's difficult. It's just a movie. It's like, relax. I don't play that precious nonsense. Get out of here. Your son got shot in the face. That's difficult. Making a movie is a luxury. It's a gift and an opportunity. And most importantly, it's a gift. Obviously, everyone in this room is talented enough to do it, but don't get it twisted. This is all about attitude. You can be rich, famous, beautiful, and still be miserable thinking your life is hard. All right, so really perspective is really, really important. Now, when I think about exercise, I'm a big runner, and I run because punching people is how you get fired. I want to keep my job. And this is a great example. Traci Falbo, she's actually a physical therapist. Basically, this is a picture of her now. What happened is she got a divorce, not feeling good about herself, depressed, and then she started running. Lost weight, got her confidence back, and basically now is just winning marathons. All right, so she went from depression to marathon champ just by exercising. It's an amazing, exercise is an amazingly powerful way to decrease, handle stress, and actually feel better. Now, this is a really interesting study. And what they talked here is people that had high psychological stress, but didn't really exercise much. And they hear high psychological stress, and they changed from low exercise to a high exercise level. They were the control group. But depending on your stress and your exercise, if you make a change to more exercise, you actually have less event rates. If you stay at low exercise and high stress, you're gonna have the highest event rate. So exercise can definitely impact your stress level, and more importantly, not just your stress level, but your clinical outcomes, heart attack, stroke, death. This is a really interesting study looking at mental health. So stress is one thing. When stress is unabated, a lot of times you wind up with anxiety disorder, depression, etc. And this study looked at what you can do for physical activity, exercise to work on that. And this is going to be kind of hard to read, but basically what you find is you look at type of exercise on these columns and basically the burden of mental health. And what you see is mental health, the impact is about 25% or more in decreasing the risk of mental health by just exercise. And what they found in this study also is it takes about 45 minutes is kind of the sweet spot to get the most impact for lowering your mental health illnesses. And they also found out about 5 times a week was a sweet spot. Now, the reason they also thought that, no one's for sure, but if you try to exercise 6 or 7 times a week, that in and of itself can cause stress. Like I have to exercise. So they go 5 times a week was a sweet spot. The other thing that's really interesting is going outside. So there's a study looking at basically multiple psychiatric disorders and just living by a green space. Now, they did not know if the people went outside to utilize the green space, but what they found is just living by an area that has that option actually decrease a whole bunch of mental illnesses. And what you can see here, one is a line of unity, showing no difference, but almost every mental health disorder was better if you were around a green space or had access to a green space. So pretty powerful. Now let's get to work. So work, everyone on this call has to work. And work is tough now because either you're overworking or you're being furloughed or laid off. So there's a lot of stress right now. But there's a U-shaped relationship with work. If you don't work enough, there's an increase in cardiovascular disease. If you work too much, there's an increase in cardiovascular disease. And probably because this end you're being overworked and stressed, this end you're probably not making a lot of money and you're being stressed. So there's a sweet spot in here where work is probably the least stressful, the best for you. Now, this is a great quote about work or about everything. And this is from Ryan Holiday. Blessings and burdens are not mutually exclusive. Work is hard, and sometimes you don't want to go there, but that doesn't mean it has to be horrible, right? Sometimes there's a blessing and a burden kind of mixed together here. But this is probably best put in the movie A League of Their Own. So they're right here, Gina Davis was complaining about baseball, and this is what Tom Hanks said back to her. Of course it's hard, it's supposed to be hard. If it was easy, everyone would do it. Hard is what makes it great. Everyone here has a job to do, and I'm sure everyone here does it really, really well, and the job is hard, but that's what makes it really rewarding. If it was easy, anyone can do it, it wouldn't be that rewarding for us. Now, to really talk about that better is the book Flow. I don't know if anyone's read this book, fantastic book. But there's a couple of things to think about here. One is happiness is not the same as pleasure. Right? Full engagement, being present, enjoying the moment, that's what's kind of being in what they call the flow zone, where time is not really a factor, you get lost in what you're doing, and there's many things that cause that. The funny thing is flow is mostly occurring at work. It rarely occurs during vacation time, and here's the raw data for that. What they found basically is the flow state happens about half the time at work, and leisure only 18% of the time. Apathy is something you really don't care, 60% at work and 50% at leisure. A couple of things they talked about is, one is you found this a lot of times on vacation, where you're just trying to fill time. You really don't care, you're on vacation and you're trying to burn time. I have friends that when they're on vacation, they want to go back to work because they're just so bored on vacation. All right. The other thing that we found here in the leisure, they say one of the most apathetic activities that he found in the book was powerboating. So you think people that are rich can afford to own a boat, rent a boat, water ski, whatever, would be loving life. That was one of the lowest scoring activities in their study. It's fascinating. And this kind of goes into, this is graphically representing what the flow zone is. So suppose you have a challenge, whether it's a very difficult thing to code, a difficult surgery or procedure to do for a doctor, or maybe a hard math problem, that's the challenge level. Also, it's your skill level. How good are you at something? And basically, when something is really, if you have low skill and you're doing a very tough project, you get overwhelmed. But if you're very skilled, very good at your job, and you have a low level challenge, you get bored. What you want is to be close to, above or below what your ability level is. And that's when people really get engaged and have the most enjoyment, the most fulfillment in whatever they're doing, whether it's leisure, work, etc. Now, trying to bring this back socially, and this is really important. Probably one of the biggest areas we have social interaction is at work. And that is also a blessing and a burden. A lot of times we love our coworkers. A lot of times we can't stand some of them. So you have the blessing and the burden at the same time. But one thing that's been happening now with the COVID-19 pandemic is we're all quarantined or locked down at home. We're all working from home. Even the fact that we're doing the Zoom conference is a testament to that fact. And a lot of us are not getting the normal social interaction we want. But loneliness is a huge factor. So Cigna, the insurance company, did a survey in 2018 and it had some pretty interesting results. Basically, almost half, about 46% of people in the United States they surveyed feel left out or alone. All right. This is crazy. 1 in 4 people feel that no one understands them. So they do not have a strong connection to any other person. That's 25%. All right. 2 in 5, next one, about 43% feel that they do not have a meaningful relationship with another person. So you start thinking about that, that's a huge subset of the population, and that can easily go from loneliness to depression, etc. And social integration is really, really important. So there's a huge study, 34,000 people tracked for over 24 years. And this is kind of what they found out here. Basically, if you're married, and this is contrary to popular opinion, it cuts your risk by about half for men who are committing suicide. All right, probably even more if you have a good marriage. All right, also your relative score, if you have relatives and friends, it's almost a half or a 50% reduction in your risk of suicide. Going to church, even once a week, cuts your risk by about half as well. All right, now this is interesting. Social group participation, just because you're in some kind of group, probably doesn't really matter. What matters is how meaningful it is. And that's why I think the marriage, church, and their friends, family made a big difference here. Now, once again, like we talked about with stress, there's something called perceived stress, perceived social isolation. So if you just feel lonely, if you feel isolated, that by itself is going to give you a higher mortality than other people. And once again, this is not some objective measure. This is you self-reporting, I feel isolated, I feel lonely. Just by that fact gives you increased mortality. I don't know if you guys have seen a study called the Blue Zone. This is in National Geographic, a bunch of different magazines before. But these are several cities where the people in that city live about 10 years more than the surrounding populations. And this is Loma Linda, Sardinia. There's also Okinawa. These are some of the cities that have this. And they kind of looked and drilled down to what are the factors, the common factors in these different cities that make people live longer. And 5 of the 8 factors are actually mental, having purpose, downshift, which they mean decreased stress, but belonging to the group, being associated strongly with your family, and being in the right tribe all had a huge impact on your longevity. And those are just mental or social interactions. All right, we're going to kind of wrap up quickly here with work here. Does anyone believe this? Does everyone believe this factor? Successful people want others to succeed. Unsuccessful people want others to fail. Probably true to some degree. Has anyone read this book, Give and Take by Adam Grant? So he's in a lot of business research. It's very interesting. But he has people in 3 main groups. One is what we call the givers, who actually help other people out. The takers, who are basically self-interested. And finally, the matchers. These are the people that will give you something if you give them, or they'll not help you if you don't help them. All right, and he said about 50% of people are actually matchers. Now, what he says in his research is the givers do the best, but they also do the worst. The takers and matchers are in the middle. And he kind of subdivides the whole group a little bit more. And we'll go through this graph here. So if you look at how concerned you are for others, if you're very concerned, high concern for others, low concern, and then your self-interest, low, high. Basically, if you don't care about yourself, don't care about others, and don't care about yourself, you're kind of apathetic. You're just kind of going through the motions, picking up your paycheck. Now, if you really care about yourself a lot, but don't care about others, you're what we call the selfish taker. Now, if you do care about others' interests, but you don't care about yourself, this is what we call kind of the doormat. You get walked over, people know to abuse you, they ask you for favors all the time. What he advocates is what he calls the otherish givers, where you care a lot about yourself, you care about others. And this is a group of people that will push their own projects and help other people push their own projects, but they will have some self-limits as well. And that's the group that he says does the best. And what I challenge you is to think how you fit into this grid and think how your co-workers fit into the grid. And it'll be interesting to see that when we eventually go back to work. Now, this is an incredible study. There's something called epigenetics. And what that talks about is how your genes are actually transcribed and turned into protein. The DNA, your genetic code has not changed, but how much is turned into protein can be changed, and that's called epigenetics. This is a really incredible study. So they had two groups. One's called the hedonic group. They asked a group of people to do something nice for themselves, go shopping, buy a purse for yourself, do something like that. The other group, the eudaimomic, they said, go help someone else out, work at a soup kitchen, donate money, etc. Now, this is fascinating. They measured their DNA, RNA before the activity and after the activity, and then they measured the change. And what you can see, the people that did something for themselves, their pro-inflammatory markers went up and their antibody production went down. The people that did things for other people, inflammation went down a little bit, not statistically significant, but look at their interferon and antibody production went way up. By doing something for somebody else, you actually made yourself more resistant to infection. You made yourself more healthy. And it's amazing that you can just do that in a short amount of time just by doing a single act of kindness. All right, the Dickens process. Everyone, I think, has seen Christmas Story. So this is a cool thing that actually Tony Robbins has done. I've never been to one of his conferences, but I read about this question that he asked people. And basically the question is this: what are your beliefs costing you? Now, we talked a lot in this talk about, like, it's mostly in your mind, stress is how you perceive it, positive attitude, etc. And when he asked people, people have beliefs like, I'm not smart enough, I'm not pretty enough, my boss is keeping me down at work, my coworker is keeping me down, I wish I made a better choice in college. You have all these beliefs running around your head. But he asks you, what has that belief cost you in the past? And for an example, we'll say, I'm not smart enough. Like, by really thinking that, and then you believe it, did you not try hard on tests? Did you not get the best grades? Did you not go to the best school? Did you not get to the best job? How have you limited yourself? Then next question, what are your beliefs costing you at the present? Is there a promotion you want to go for? Is there a project you want to bring up to run with? Is there something that you want to do at home, but you don't think you're smart enough, capable enough? What are those beliefs costing you? And this is the most important question. What will those beliefs cost you in the future? What opportunities are you not going to go for that you're going to let pass yourself by just because of your own thought process? We have to get out of our own way and go for it. Doesn't mean we're going to win every time, but we have to try. All right. So your mission, if you should choose to accept it, from Mission Impossible here, think positive, don't stress, total waste of time and energy. Laugh, be happy. Helping other people actually helps you. It helps you biochemically, physically, can help you at work as well. Be social, get some sleep, and have purpose. All right, that's it. Thank you for your attention.